morning, everyone. Looks like folks are jumping on. We'll give everybody a minute or two and we'll get started. All right. Good morning, everyone. It looks like folks are still logging in, but we'll go through a couple of housekeeping items first. I guess good morning and good afternoon for those of you on the East Coast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the third installment of our Infinite Insights series. So today's discussion is all around the Hoonuit product roadmap, and specifically how we are making investments in our platform to support and address really this evolving world we're living in today, and making sure that we're making adjustments to your adjustments in education. My name is Andrea Gromberg. I lead marketing and communications here at Hoonuit and will be your host for today's event. We're really excited to dive into today's discussion and share some exciting updates for you. For those of you that have been a part of the Hoonuit community for the past couple of years, you'll know that we usually do this type of presentation or announcement in our November customer event that we usually do on site. This year we were supposed to be at Keller ISD right outside of Dallas, but we're excited to actually share this a little earlier than November. Our product and engineering team has been working really hard at some of these new enhancements to make sort of even more of our summer release, to hopefully make your lives a little easier as we move forward with reopening plans and really figuring out how we're going to continue to operate in this changing time and whatever that looks like for your community. So we're so grateful for all of you for joining us. We know this is a stressful time and all of you are in kind of different phases of your reopening plans. Before we get started, just a quick housekeeping item. So we do have close to, I think, 100 registrants today. We are in kind of listen only mode for the webinar, but we do encourage you to ask questions throughout today's discussion using the Q&A feature right in the Zoom tool. We'll be monitoring those questions as we go and incorporating them into the discussion where we can. We're also going to try to save a couple of minutes toward the end of the discussion to address any Q&A directly in our presentation. So let's dive in. Meet our three presenters today. First, we have Sarah Singer, our fantastic head of customer success. She just gave a little wave. So Sarah's actually going to share throughout today's discussion a summary of what she and her team have heard over the last several months around challenges that this pandemic has brought to our agencies. She and her team have done just a fantastic job of keeping a really open feedback loop into our product organization to ensure our platform's addressing these challenges along the way, which leads me to our next presenter, Tyler Kuhn, our head of product, who's done a fantastic job of adjusting to all these challenges. So Tyler's actually going to share all of the new and sort of soon to come platform enhancements, and how these investments are going to help solve some of those major pain points that I'm sure you're all experiencing in your data work for this school year and beyond. We also have Tracy McCown, our senior solution architect, also joining us today. Many of you have worked with Tracy or probably her colleague Shane Kendall pre-implementation to kind of help you scope out what each of your solutions look like and how we're aligning the platform to your strategic needs. Tracy is going to lead today's demo portion of the presentation, and will also be available to answer any technical questions along the way. All right, so before we jump into the enhancements themselves, I wanted to share a few key themes that are really driving our product investments this year, and you'll see that kind of come to fruition in the summer release. We are relentlessly committed to innovation. That's a theme that, as we approach each of our roadmaps each year, but I think that's especially important this year with all of the change that we've all experienced. So our roadmap consists of kind of a diverse set of solutions and tools that you'll see today that are really grounded in kind of these 4 themes. So the first is really kind of designed throughout the roadmap around adaptability. We want to make sure our platform can consistently adapt, conform, configure to help your organization quickly pivot as unexpected change occurs, which we've all experienced over the last 6 months. The second is around what we've coined integrated actions, which really provide you and your educators with solution-oriented sort of next steps to take that action. We have several workflows and data-driven processes that really complement the visualizations themselves. So you'll get to see some of our new planning tools and how we're expanding our intervention management function throughout the platform. Next is our advanced predictive modeling. So this really, we've taken some action to account for some of the realities, particularly lack of kind of assessment data that we've seen over the last several months. So these are only going to be applicable for customers that are using early warning and our student success suites, but hopefully if you're considering those solutions in the future, this will be educational nonetheless. And finally, easier and more efficient implementations. So for those of you who are in active implementations today, you might already be reaping some of these benefits. Agencies that are interested in bringing in new or alternative data sources like surveys, we've seen a huge uptick in survey use. Or if you're considering expanding to a new solution, solution suite as part of our portfolio, you'll be able to take advantage of some more self-service kind of approach to integrating the data quality, configuration, et cetera. And in the hopes that we're really helping you save time and money on your implementation, which I know we could all use today as our data need list grows and our budgets are more uncertain than ever. So without further ado, we'll dive into the details. I'm actually going to pass the presentation over to Sarah Singer to help set the stage for our first roadmap item.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. All right, well, a big part of my job is fundamentally to listen to customers. So we, as you know, with customer success, we have a team of 4. They're assigned accounts customers, and like I said, what we do is we listen to what you are experiencing right now in this context, and we feed it back to Hoonuit in hopes that we can improve our product and ultimately meet your needs, and ultimately at the end of the day, meet student needs. So that's, so a lot of what I'm gonna talk about is actually the stuff that you have told us, and I'm gonna regurgitate that back to you. And what's interesting about my role is I get to talk to big districts, small districts, urban districts, rural districts, states, you name it. And there's definitely some similarities and some common needs. And so I'm excited about what we're going to present today because I think fundamentally, I believe that it will help you meet some of those common needs. The other thing I want to just talk a little bit about is most of my commentary today about what we're hearing is going to be more in the what I'm going to call COVID context. There's obviously been a huge shift in how we've had to deliver education as a result of this pandemic. Having stated that, I think it's important to note that almost everything on this roadmap and these improvements that we're going to talk about are aligned to what I would call best practice, like the fundamentals of education. So I'm going to, for example, starting off with school improvement planning. Every district, every school should have school improvement planning processes. We should all be collectively reviewing data We should be doing that in collaboration with one another, learning from one another, opening up our practice, right? And so that's an example. And we have some improvements on the school improvement planning front that largely, what I would say, opens up the practice, makes it more collaborative, less paper-based, less fragmented. Similarly, there are another fundamental practice is the notion of meeting individualized student needs. And to do that, a tool to use in meeting needs is a plan, an individualized student plan. And so you can imagine needing a plan for highly capable students, for maybe for a college and career readiness plan, a 504 plan, you name it. Again, these are like basic fundamental education practices, but I think in this context, what we know is that you can't walk over to your colleague's office and put a piece of paper down and say, can you react to this? We're not really in that mode right now. Most districts, as you know, are opening online, some hybrid, and even those who are opening in person at any given moment have to be prepared to be working remotely. So that's the context that we find ourselves in. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tyler in a minute to talk a little bit about how we are making specifically student plans and school and the kind of school improvement planning process more of a digitized collaborative process.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So student plans. Student plans are, as Sarah mentioned, really a culmination of a lot of input from you all to really identify this kind of extension of some of our existing capabilities. Student plans are things like 504 plans, behavior plans, test accommodation plans. And the idea with the capabilities we're about to release are that you can now leverage the data that's in the platform and collaborate on those plans with that data. So the basic process is that you can go out and you can actually create your own plans. We know that plans, even with the same type or title, vary widely from district to district. And so there's a really easy drag and drop builder that I'll actually get into a bit more detail on, where anyone can configure their plans for their specific needs. Then you can actually pull in data from the data warehouse in specific categories to be able to match that up with those plans. And a number of roles will be able to actually create those plans and manage those in an ongoing way. And then report off those plans. So it's important to use data, create the plans, but also to understand the outcomes of those plans. And so there's kind of 3 different factors that all roll up into what we'll be releasing for student plans. So to get into a little bit more detail here, if you go to the next slide, the plan configuration is kind of where it all starts. We'll actually be working on some standard templates that will be able to be tweaked a bit for your specific needs, but know that you can create any plan from scratch for any purpose you might need. And the plan builder, again, uses kind of Google Form-esque capabilities where you can drag and drop different form elements, as well as some specific data elements into the plan. Some examples of that might be assessment scores, demographics, behavior incidents. Each of those elements that are in the platform today will actually be able to be pulled in real time into these given plans. So when you all go out and configure these plans, then as they're saved and published, they're available for use to your entire team. So on the next slide, then, to create a plan, once these templates are actually configured, someone might choose to actually go out and look at a student profile and create a plan from there. Or you could actually go from more of a different angle, the broader angle, to look at a given report and then decide you need to create a plan from that. And so there's a number of different ways or paths to creating student plans that can start at both the student level or on the class or even the school level. So so then once the educator actually go out and complete the plans, they're then available for reporting. So on the next slide, then, this is purely some examples and a prototype here, but as we're building this out, we're actually continuing to consult with a number of you on what should be in this reporting. But the idea is, on the left, you're seeing that there's a list of a given student's plans and some metadata about those plans. And on the right, there's more of the aggregate view of what kinds of plans exist, what might be the trends of outcomes of those plans, et cetera. So the idea is that it's fully configurable and rather easy to use from front to back. and can continue to grow as your needs change and evolve. Hitting back on one of Sarah's points, and really kind of the key to this, is that this is now all in the same place using the same data source. So as we really hone in on pulling these data elements from the data warehouse, now anyone can go out and see those with the appropriate roles and permissions, of course, can go out and see those plans in place and be able to respond and interact with them accordingly. So then the other element that Sarah mentioned is in school improvement planning. School improvement planning is actually a tool that's been around for a little bit of time, but we've actually made some enhancements to it. For those that don't know, school improvement is another form-based tool that allows folks to go out and configure their own plan for their particular district or school, and then be able to interact with that and pull in data from the warehouse to plan and adjust to those plans. The key changes with that, however, are a lot more collaboration features. So what we've actually released recently is the ability to not only share with other users, but to be able to live view those things and be able to collaborate similar to Google Docs in the way that someone might be editing and kind of driving the conversation, while others can actually follow along with those changes in real time. And so those, again, in not just the response to kind of best practice, but also in COVID times, the need to really collaborate digitally and in a single place, I think is ever more prevalent, and that's exactly the kind of the reason we're really emphasizing these today.
All right, thanks, Tyler. I'm going to talk a little bit about another topic that we're hearing a lot about, and this is actually probably more of a reminder than anything, but in this context, we recognize that there is a strong need to group students, to create cohorts of students, to create pods of students, whatever term you want to use. And we're hearing that for a variety of reasons. One is there is a scenario, and I think we're all aware of this one, where we may have a group of students who are demonstrating poor online engagement. Maybe they need a little bit more attention through distance learning, that kind of thing. You want to group those students, perhaps assign an additional support or intervention, or make sure someone's connecting with them. Maybe you have one of their kind of most trusted adult mentors connect with them, some kind of intervention to get them back engaged. So you may want to group those students. Another thing we're hearing is, and this is a newer one, but that there may be a need to group students by various health data attributes, such as those who've come in close proximity to a student who has tested positive for COVID-19. So for example, we did talk to one district who was actually interested in learning about, for example, is a student, what transportation, like what bus are they on? Literally, what bus are they on? Not just what classroom are they associated with or what sort of curriculum instruction grouping, but other things like a bus, what bus they're on, or what after school activities they're participating in, kind of almost a mini contact tracing effort there for that district. And then you can imagine students who need to be grouped maybe on things like, do they have Wi-Fi access provided by the school district? So you want to kind of monitor that. So those are just three use cases for, in today's context, for cohorting or grouping students. And Tyler's going to talk a little bit about the ways that we can create a cohort in our platform.
Yeah, so there's three primary ways to create a cohort. The one and the one that I've seen most often used, at least in my experience, has been through the actions of the student list. So anywhere that there's a student list, you can select any number of students. Perhaps you want to select the entire list or a subset of the students in that list. You can use the actions menu that you're seeing there in the screenshot and actually add them to a cohort in real time. So when you do that, you'll see you can add them to a group. You'd select the group and then save it. It would automatically connect those students to that group or cohort. That's kind of the most manual and straightforward way to do it. However, there's much more intricate ways that can do this in real time. The next one is dynamically creating cohorts from a query. So like as conditions change, you may not want to go out and check the student list of new at-risk students or whatever the condition might be. You want them to automatically be pulled in or out of that group depending on specific contexts. So with dynamic creation of cohorts, you can actually define a query that will real-time evaluate the conditions that you've stated and pull them in or out of the cohort at any given point in time. And then the third way to do it is loading a cohort with external sources. And so there's some ETL processes that can actually identify students as they're being pulled into the system that can put them automatically in those cohorts as well. So those are kind of the three primary ways to do it. One small feature that I did want to mention was that there has been a few changes for those that are already using the grouping functionality. You can now also copy and paste into the list of students that will automatically match IDs and identify those students if you're perhaps using a spreadsheet or another system that has a list of IDs or students. You could actually paste those right in there rather than having to go out and locate those students in the dashboard itself. So it's another maybe quick little workaround that maybe you're struggling with before that I think is also important to know.
Yeah, and just to jump in here, Tyler, there was a question on the chat. Will it be possible to assign groups of students to interventions? The answer is yes. This is definitely possible to do that.
That same workflow that you add to groups is the same one that you can use to add to intervention. So that same process, when you have intervention active in your system under the actions button, in addition to seeing groups, you actually will see add to intervention. So it's that same quick and easy workflow to identify students and directly place them into the level of support that you think is most appropriate. The last thing I just want to kind of note around grouping, because it's one that I oftentimes see people just kind of forget about because there's so much to do as you get ready with essentials. Just a reminder that those student groups can be shared. So they either can be shared across your entire system or just with a handful of users or with a specific user group. So as a district level leader, if there are some different data elements that you want all your building leaders to be aware of students that match certain criteria, as a reminder, your security profile every time you log in lives between you and the data. So even if there are 5,000 kids across your district that meet this specific criteria, if I push it out to all building leaders in my 32 schools, if I log in from Adams Elementary School and I use that filter, I'm only going to see the 250 students that are relevant to me that I have access to see. So it's a great way for district level leaders to take a little bit of pressure off of some of the building leaders and teachers right now with everything that they have on their plates. I know we're really looking for ways to support our sites. And so just as a reminder, even though you can share things out, it's not going to trump that security capacity as well for all of your staff.
All right, well, that's a nice segue into intervention management. So yeah, it's great to be able to group students, but the reason you're grouping students is generally to provide some type of support, service, intervention to help better meet their needs fundamentally. And so, yeah, we're hearing, obviously there's going back to the fundamentals, there's early warning, RTI, MTSS needs, those remain. And now I just think they're taking on a slightly different flavor because of our COVID context. Again, we've talked about distance learning, absenteeism, engagement with virtual instruction, social and emotional support. We're seeing kids with low-level, depression, quite frankly, in this context. And so providing those interventions for kids who need them is something strongly supported by our platform.
Yeah, so the biggest update with interventions is that now it's available across the platform. Previously, it was part of our early warning module, and now you can actually add students to interventions within any given context. So, for example, with essentials, as you look at that same list that was on a prior slide, you could actually add them to an intervention group and be able to kind of cross between the different modules as you identify intervention needs. But at the broader sense, interventions are really just the way to track that progress and to be able to include data along the way. The biggest piece that is coming with our release, in addition to kind of the cross-platform, is also the ability to do deeper deeper level of reporting and be able to really understand outcomes or understand really the impact that these interventions have had. So with this upgrade that's coming, we'll actually be able to both look at the broader sense of data as well as have deeper tracking that will allow folks to further evaluate their interventions and continue to collaborate.
Great. Okay, so what we're hearing, no assessment data. What do I do? Like, how do I predict whether a student is at risk or not? Now that we didn't do assessments last spring, so that's something that's a question mark for many districts. We know that COVID-19 is potentially probably widening our achievement and opportunity gaps, and given both of these these pieces, there is an increasing need to be able to identify students at risk and needing to do so in ways that that may look different than before. And so we have, as you know, we have an early warning system module, and we've adjusted the methodology a little bit to be able to address the needs in this context.
Yeah, so before we get into those specific changes, the broader picture here is that for those that haven't yet used these modules or really dug into our predictives, there's some extreme power behind them. They're both embedded in our early warning and student success modules, and the need for predictives going forward is obviously heightened even further, or at least to digitize those things within the platform, given COVID. And so the key change in the model, though, is that we're actually really looking at the data that drives those predictives. So the adjustment we need to make, of course, is since there's no data from last spring for assessments, we need to find ways to build a predictive model and continue to give valid predictions. We had to actually look at the prior year of scores as well. So we've actually, there's a great visual on the next slide here that for those visual learners, typically we would look at the current year and the previous year. However, this year, given that whole, we're actually going to pull in a prior year of data as well, so that the predictions are using the same amount, actually a little bit more data, but are actually something that gives you a consistent basis to make those predictions. Court, did you want to add anything on this?
No, I think we covered it. We just really tried to take advantage of the data that we had and really looking at extending back a little bit further to make sure that we don't lose the power of those longer term trends, as we look at patterns of achievement for students. So, and knowing spring was crazy and everybody kind of did a little different and behavior data kind of stopped existing, like we all look great for our end of year behavior outcomes from last year. And attendance in most places is rock star awesome, right? So we know that, the spring did not follow normal patterns for our systems. And so rather than bringing that in and introducing that kind of unknown into the system, we went ahead and just kind of artificially ended the year a little bit early and captured some further data back just to make sure we're still using the same amount of information for predictions.
Okay, so what are we hearing? Blended learning is the future, and what at least in the it's at least the immediate future. Let's put it that way. Just to give some examples here around blended learning, if you think about the continuum of a student's journey towards learning, and in a blended learning context, the first thing you have to be able to know is literally, do they have access? If it's remote and it's online, do they have access to Wi-Fi? Do they have a device? Because we can pretty much guarantee that if they don't, learning will be impacted, right? So that's kind of the first stop in the journey. The next stop in the journey, or the next set of if I was thinking about this from an inquiry-based model, the next question I might ask is, are they engaging? Okay, so great, they have a laptop, they have Wi-Fi, but are they logging on? How long are they logging on? Are they logging on to some courses maybe, or some situations, but not in others? Why? Quite frankly, are teachers engaging? Like that's another big question mark there. And then lastly, like how are they engagement? How are they engaging? Are we getting the outcomes that we want based on their access and their level of engagement? So they could be logging on, but are they learning? And so I think those are kind of the questions that we need to ask ourselves in a COVID context in order to really truly support students' needs. The other thing that we're hearing a lot about is just what in the heck constitutes attendance in this distance learning environment. So you have e-learning attendance. You have for those who are open in person, you have in-person attendance. So we're starting to see the need for thinking about attendance in a different way. And so this is just an example. We've shown this to you before for those who've tuned in. This is U46 Elgin. This was actually a dashboard that they had produced last spring, but it kind of gets at, they wanted to know about their what they called e-learning attendance in this context. And really at that time, they were focused on making sure this is about equitable outcomes for students, that their English language learner population, that their students with disabilities were attending at high rates. And so they wanted to begin tracking that metric specifically. So what at Hoonuit, we've created a kind of a digital learning analytics set of dashboards that Tyler's going to walk through.
Yeah, so actually we'll get into a demo here in just a minute, so I don't want to steal too much of Tracy's thunder, but again, it really comes down to kind of three things. There's access, engagement, and outcomes. So as we design these dashboards, we were really looking at first, are there barriers to student access? Are there different elements to student access that we can identify within the data? And then looking at how to provide some of those engagement challenges then to educators so that they can actually implement maybe different digital learning approaches. And then of course, all of that is kind of precursor to, and then what's actually happening in terms of student outcomes. So tying those three things together, you're seeing a little bit in the dashboard in the screenshot here, but I would actually turn it over to Tracy so that we can see this in more of a real sense. So Tracy, do you want to give us a walkthrough?
All right, hi everyone. Can you see my screen okay and hear me okay? All right, awesome. I hope everyone is surviving back to school, or thriving. We'll go big and say thriving for this year. So what I'm going to show you is what Tyler just introduced is some examples of ways that you can track digital learning. So I know, for example, my son is going back all online next week, and 4 days a week in the morning, they're going to be engaging with teachers. And then the rest of the time, they're just on their own. And they're expected to be learning during normal school hours, but there's going to be kids without parents at home, or it's probably going to vary quite widely as to how many kids are really getting on and doing their learning during those times. So having a tool like this to be able to track those things can be really helpful for knowing, which kids are accessing the system. So when they're not actively engaged with their teacher, are they getting in and just accessing it? That's where it all starts. It's like the attendance of digital learning. Are they showing up to learn? And so we can track here, how many students do we have logging in? How many teacher users do we have? And then just some different information about, what are our average student logins in a day? How many sessions total? How much time are they spending? So, we've seen cases before where users know they're being tracked, so they log in to get that number and they log right back out. So we want to know how long they're spending there as well. And not only to students, but also our teachers getting back into the system? Are they using their planning time wisely? Are they interacting with kids in some kind of way when they're not actively teaching through Zoom or Teams or some kind of tool that they're using? And then just being able to, again, track trends over time, which is something that, you know, we do really well in Hoonuit is, you know, over the last 30 days or the last, you know, 60 days, are we seeing any changes in students or teachers accessing the system? Because that can really tell us, you know, how they're feeling about their experience. Did we do really good in September? Everyone's excited, and then it starts to drop off, and now we need to do some kind of, you know, push to get people, you know, accessing the system again. And then something that Sarah touched on a little earlier is making sure that we're really taking care of all our subpopulations. So we might start to see that different subpopulations are struggling or thriving more than others, and we need to make sure in this digital age especially that we're providing all the right supports to all the kids who need it. So like all of our software, you can always drill down. Every metric is drillable. So, you know, once I know that I have this group of kids that are not even accessing, they're not even showing up, now I need to know who they are. So I was going to talk about cohorts here, and I don't need to because we already talked about cohorts, which is great. So of course here, now that I know I have my kids who aren't even accessing the system, I'm going to want to reach out to them. And then maybe I'm going to want to come back in a week later and see if those numbers has changed. So of course I can take all these kids, put them in a cohort, take action, and come back later and see if my access has improved. So once we get kids just showing up, now we want to know if they're really engaging. So, you know, how many courses are they interacting with? Do they love English and so they show up and do their English every day, but they're not looking at their math because they don't like that subject, but that's really the subject they need to be working on. And just what kind of, you know, content? Are they doing their assignments? Are they completing their quizzes? Are they participating in discussions? So we can get a little more granular here to see how kids are engaging in the content. So if we see that kids are going in and taking quizzes and failing, but they're not doing their assignments, maybe that's a really good place for us to start in helping these kids. And then of course, knowing how teachers are engaging in the system. So making sure that teachers are creating the right kind of content and that kids are engaging in them, that kids have assignments to do when they're at home, and you know, what kind of activities are being graded by teachers or not graded and it's just participation. So there's a lot of different things that we can track for engagement. And here are some examples here that could really get you started on being able to track digital learning. Okay, so I see a question from Andrea that I'm going to answer right now. Does this dashboard exist and connect to any LMS, or is it a custom build for each district? So there's two questions there. First off is the connection to data. We have a connector for LMS. You can put files in our format and load that data through our file loader to get data in the system. So that includes Canvas. We already have clients that are loading data from Canvas. We have clients loading data from Google, and I know there's other systems out there. So that's how you can get data into the system. The second part is around content. So anything that you see here, you can have. Once you get the data in the system, this will connect to our backend tables, and you can have anything that you see here. And then anything else that you want, of course, you can build out like you normally do in Hoonuit. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the last piece, and I think this is really the meat of it, is you know, our student outcomes. Are they learning? And of course, access engagement gives us a really good idea of what we're going to see in our outcomes. So, you know, taking different data points and starting to piece that picture together. You know, how many times are they logging in, and what grade are they getting in that course? You know, we probably would expect less logins equals a lower grade, but you know, sometimes data surprises us, so we can come in here and see how kids are doing. And then over here, I think this metric is really important, is tracking student grades by week. So, you know, I think we're going to have a lot of disruption this fall. We're going to have districts that start in hybrid and end up going full online, or kids that start fully online and then we start to go back to hybrid and bring kids back to school. We really need to know what happens with kids learning when those disruptions occur. So being able to track their grades over time is one way that we can do that. So if kids are doing really good in a hybrid environment and then all of a sudden we go all online and they start struggling, we know that kid needs extra support. So this dashboard here is really important because we want to take all that digital learning information and we want to start attaching it to those student outcomes so we really know how to support each student. So scrolling down here, doing the same thing but with test scores. How are their test scores changing from fall, winter, spring? We know that we don't have test scores from last spring, and so one of the things that we're hearing a lot of is there's going to be a lot more benchmarking this fall. So, you know, maybe you're going to even be benchmarking every month and you want to track those kind of changes, or, you know, whatever it is that you need to track to make sure that these kids are learning, you can put into the system and of course compare it to any kind of digital learning activities that are happening. And then the last piece that is more important as ever is social emotional learning. So we know that this is a really hard time for all of our kids, all of our families, and for our staff. And we're hearing that more and more SEL engagement will be happening. You know, even daily just check-ins of 3 questions of how are you doing, or, you know, monthly SEL surveys, etc. So making sure that we're, you know, taking care of our whole child, not just how are their math grades or their math numbers, but making sure we know how they feel about their education. Do they need more time with their counselor? Do they need more engagement with their teachers? Those are things that we can measure through SEL surveys and other ways that we can bring into the system. So that's the end of the formal presentation. If there's any more questions, I'd be happy to take those now, or we can head on to the next agenda item.
Thanks, Tracy.
You bet.
All right. What we're hearing, we are hearing that there is a strong need for alternative data sources, a need for faster data implementations are two things. And I want to talk a little bit more about those things. I alluded to the fact that right now we're in a space and a time where we've had to upend, transform the K-12 delivery model. And as part of that, we're having to, I think what maybe a pessimist might call experiment. I think what an optimist might call innovate. So whether you view this as a time of experimentation or innovation, we're one of the two right now. And in order to sort of inform those efforts, because we are in some cases making it up as we go along, or in some cases it's changing every day, you're going to need data to be able to inform what's going on. Are these effective? How do we improve? And so oftentimes what we're seeing is the need, a much like a heightened need for quick hit surveys. So that's Tracy alluded to that with the cell survey, just the 3 quick questions to kids, but there might be other quick hit surveys even to parents, parent engagement kind of things. And then getting that data and being able to, and getting that data frequently, and then being able to adjust your delivery model as a result. And so, you know, sometimes they talk about failing fast, and we're in a position where we might need to do that. Fail fast, adjust, learn, and adapt. And the only way to sort of do that kind of process, that continuous improvement process, is, I would argue, for data to inform those processes. And so there is a strong need for alternative data sources, and I would say especially surveys. There is a strong need for fast data implementations, especially in this context. And then in light of all of that, there is a need to make all of the data management processes more efficient to support to support that cycle. And this is just, again, an example from Elgin. They had an attendance survey. That's like literally how they collected data. So sometimes even again, this gets back to the need of needing to collect data in new ways in this context. So collecting data through a survey, a daily survey, and reporting on that information in this particular case.
Yeah, so the specific tools that really get at this data efficiency are the file importer, which again opens up the door to new data sources. It allows you to kind of use a more conventional drag and drop file loading mechanism that allows you to follow the process along in more of a UI interface where you can where you can do these things through the actual developer tools rather than looking for FTP servers and all that. It's all actually integrated to those backend systems, but it allows you all to actually be able to load those files if you choose to include these new data sources. Related to that, there's a specific flavor of the file importer that's the assessment importer that has many more of the intricacies of assessment data, where there's specific signatures for different files from different vendors that will also go through a validation process and allow you to also load that up to the FTP and be imported to the data warehouse. The third piece of that is advanced data quality. So this is all about making it clearer and more usable, some of the data quality that many of you have in place today. This actually, again, puts a UI on top of it that allows you to understand what the errors might be in any given file, be able to evaluate those errors, correct them, and then reload your actual data. So, so those three are kind of like the real data aspect of this that allow more data efficiency and more, I guess, visibility to new and existing data sources. And then the query designer is really part of the content development suite. So the query designer, for those that have developed their own content in the past, this is really making this more streamlined and easier to use. We actually condense many of the metric bases so that it's much more like a drag and drop. You select your metrics, your bases and pull them into your metrics, and then are able to actually configure many of that through kind of point-click interactions. So we've simplified quite a bit of that as well, and that's all, again, part of this broader data efficiency package.
Great. I'm going to actually go back. There's a question in the Q&A that I think I'm going to have our Hoonuit team address. There was a question: is there a subgroup for vulnerable student groups, i.e. foster care, those experience homelessness, delinquent, neglected? These groups are reportable for state reporting for some of us. Can Tracy or Courtney, do you mind addressing that?
Sure. Yeah, we can absolutely do that. There's place in the data model to hold all of those, and we can create any kind of, subgrouping that you want to create. And with those being very sensitive data elements, we can also secure it down to only the people who should see that data.
Great, thank you, Tracy. Okay, so what are we hearing? We are hearing a need that we need to be able to proactively notify stakeholders. These stakeholders could be school-based staff, principals, central office administration, regardless, about changes in student populations and/or individual students. And COVID-19 is making this even more important. Educators aren't in a position to be face-to-face with students. You don't have the additional data point, maybe of body language and some of those other key data points that are actually data that people take in. Those are not necessarily available to teachers at this point in time. And so having the notifications is especially relevant in a COVID context.
Yeah, so notifications and alerts are, they actually have some different flavors. You'll see in the screenshot, there's some different icons and colors that are representing these, but the idea is that there's notifications or alerts that are both kind of informational, maybe about the platform or about a new data source or a data refresh or something. But there's, I think the most interesting in the context of Sarah's slide was there's data informed notifications. So the idea is that there's pre-configured alerts that perhaps identify a new batch of students that are at risk or a new batch of students that were added to a given group. The idea is that these things are all elements that you can build out based on the priorities and the individual user needs that you have. So so the idea is we'll actually have some pre-configured alerts that are out there that you may adjust or change subscription models to, but you may build your own as well. And so with that, you can set different roles, different messages and priorities of those notifications, and kind of build this out over time based on your specific needs. These, and I guess the other thing to note is these are both available in the platform. So you'll see like the little icon in the top right of the screenshot, as well as email. So this can also be a kind of a queue if folks aren't logging in every day or every minute, who has time for that. You can actually also get these important notifications delivered to your inbox.
All right, well, with that, I wanted to open it up to any questions. I know you've been peppering them in or putting them into the Q&A, but wanted to give a little bit of an opportunity here for questions, comments, etc.
Maybe while we're waiting for folks to ask questions, I know some of the pre-questions we got during registration were just around timing. So I know I will, in the follow-up communication, will actually include our summer roadmap document that kind of walks through those details for each of the features that you saw today. Tyler, I don't know if you want to sort of generally answer and talk about the release or how we're scheduling all of that.
Yeah, so a few of these things are actually available now, and then many will actually be packaged late fall and generally in our winter release. Those specifically include some of the notifications, the student plans, and I'm drawing a blank here. We did this a bit out of sequence, more in categories. So, but some of that will be in the detailed docs as well.
Great, thank you. Doesn't look like there's any other live questions in Q&A. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to talk a little bit about next steps.
Sure, absolutely. So I have two asks of the audience members today. One is if anything sparked your interest today and you want to know, hey, how do I get that? Feel free to reach out to your data consultant or data advisor on the Hoonuit side. So that Dave, if you don't mind waving, so that's Dave Moyer. We have James Riddlesberger, Sabrina, Yusuf, and Matt Reese. So you should all know who your data advisor is. If you don't, reach out to me and I'll help you out with that. The other ask, and this is also just a thank you. We learn from you. So the fact that you have shared your insights with us, the context that you live in, the challenges that you're facing right now, helps us to improve the product. And I view this almost as like a circle. So we hear from you, we adjust our product to better meet your needs, and the cycle goes on that way. And so hopefully you view that as a continuous improvement mentality. That's what we're aiming for. So keep it up. Thank you for sharing your challenges with my team, with Courtney, with Tracy, with the Hoonuit team, because it allows us, I think, to get better and ultimately meet student needs. So.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks Tyler and Tracy for walking through the features. I do want to give a plug to our Insight report. Some of you may have gotten this in your inbox already. We'll make sure to include it in the follow-up materials with the webinar recording. So what this piece does is actually highlights kind of a plethora of COVID use cases. So you obviously saw the ones today that align to some of the enhancements in the roadmap. This is kind of a broader set of use cases that Sarah and team have captured over the last couple of months and kind of walks you through some strategies on how you can help solve those with the platform. So definitely check that out. It's a lengthy piece, but hopefully everybody will find a couple of good strategies to weave into their reopening plans or just data use in general moving forward. A quick plug for a couple of upcoming events. So we're kind of landing on a monthly cadence for this Infinite Insights webinar series. So we have two more great topics queued up. Next month is a panel discussion around student equity. So we'll actually have some of our partner districts kind of sharing how they're tackling that in their work today. And then our October discussion, we want to kind of get back to the format of the few that we did over the summer and just talk a little bit about how your reopening plan went, what challenges you're seeing and what you're looking at for the future of the 2020-2021 school year. So definitely check that out. And then I believe we're queuing up one in November that'll be tied more to operations and budgeting. So that is the presentation that we have prepared for you today. Feel free to chat in any other last questions. We'll hang on here for a couple of minutes and then look for a follow-up communication with the webinar and some supporting materials for today's presentation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.